All right. Welcome everyone back to the newest episode of the New Year's Six podcast. Hope everyone is staying cool out there as we go through another one of our conference preview videos for the 2024 season. This is going to be our Big Ten episode. So we're going to go team by team within the conference, give you a full breakdown of where they're at, where I think they're going to finish. If you haven't seen the ACC video, it's going to be the same rules as before, where start out at the bottom of the conference, work my way up to who I think is going to be at the top of the conference. And for each team, just kind of talk about a potential breakout player on the offensive, defensive sides of the ball. So pretty straightforward. And then we'll make a championship pick at the end. So new look Big Ten. We got 4 teams from out west, former Pac-12. We got USC, Oregon, Washington, and UCLA. So how are they going to factor into the mix? How are they going to perform in their first year? Are they going to play spoiler to Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and some of our favorites from the past? Time will tell. But without further ado, let's kick it off to the first team I've got here. So the team that I think is going to come in last in the Big Ten this year, that's going to be Purdue. It's a tough job, man. It's a tough place to be. They're definitely in their rebuild phase right now. Ryan Walters has his work cut out for him. Had a tough go of it last year. Probably going to have another tough go of it. So from that angle, it's going to be hard to overcome. It's going to be hard to make the most of this. Not rooting against them, not rooting against any of the players or the team in particular, but I just think it's a big mountain to climb for Purdue right now, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get back to a Big Ten championship game or back into the thick of it. But the one thing you can always depend on with Purdue is they're due for an upset at some point. They're gonna shock somebody. They're gonna get a freak game at night. I think they have Oregon at home at night this year. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the one they shock the world for. But otherwise, on paper, Purdue is going to have a tough go of it this year. So Ryan Walters back for year 2, running an air raid offense as well as a 3-4 defense. And just from a depth chart perspective, kind of looking at what they're running this year. Quite a few transfers on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball. So if you see anything in gold there, if you see you see any name that's in gold, that will be someone new to the team, whether it's a true freshman or it's a transfer. So in the case of the offense, looking at the O-line first, O-line's pretty experienced. I'll give them that. It's going to be a middle of the road O-line, and generally speaking, it's going to be an O-line that is reliable for this team year in and year out. It's a middle of the pack, probably a little bit above average O-line for Purdue within the Big Ten. You got Corey Stewart coming in from Ball State. He's an experienced starter on that blindside tackle spot. So big addition and big upgrade for Hudson Card. Gus Hartwig at the center. He's coming back. He's got that experience that you're looking for. So and then Marcus Mbo on the right side as well. So the guards are the weakest part of this offensive line, but generally speaking, or the least experienced per se. But as far as I can tell, you have at least 3 solid pieces there to protect your quarterback. Receiver rooms where I've got some question marks, just because outside of Jamal Edrine, everyone else is kind of new and inexperienced. You got, Andrew Sawinski, CJ Smith, and then Max Clare at the tight end there. CJ Smith comes in from Georgia. Not a lot of experience there, but, a lot of potential and a lot of upside in this room. Quarterback room, Hudson Card, reliable, sturdy, dependable, had a good year last year. Looking to improve on it this year. I think he's in middle of the pack QB for the Big Ten. And then Devin Maccoby, I think he's probably the best part of this offense right now. I think he's the highlight of the team offensively. And if Purdue can get the run game going, if they can get something moving along, it's going to open up their options on offense. On the defensive side of the ball, unfortunately, this is where I think Purdue loses a lot of games. The DB room is solid. It's kind of the same deal where it's a couple of good additions through the portal. Nyland Green comes in from Georgia, and then Kindrich Breedlove comes in from Colorado by way of Ole Miss previously. But generally speaking, if I'm looking around the room, Dylan Thieneman is a pretty spectacular safety in his own right. And he's the one kind of holding up this DB room to begin with. I think if he wasn't there, I'd have some pretty serious questions about the room across the board. But as a true freshman, went out and balled out for this Purdue team last year. Expect nothing less, in his second year with the program. And then the D line and the linebacker room are the ones I got questions about. Just not a lot of experience there, not a lot of certainty there. The D line has not historically gotten a lot of pressure, and you definitely want to see that. Joe Anderson is solid in his own right, as is Cole Brevard, but generally speaking, you want to see a little bit more out of those two as the senior leaders on this team. Kind of the same with the linebacker room, where you have Yanni Karloftis, I'm sure related to George Karloftis, former first-round pick out of Purdue. He's definitely a guy that you can rely on back there. Combine that with Kydron Jenkins in the Mike linebacker role, and you definitely have some options. But it's really the pieces around them are the pieces that I'm a little bit more worried about. So from a breakout perspective on the offensive side of the ball, I am going to go with one of the receivers there. I'll go with Andrew Sawinski. So had a 3-catch game against Minnesota this past year, but really outside of that, hasn't seen a whole lot of action on the stats sheet. A catch here or there, and that's pretty much it. So I definitely want to see more of that this year as he helps contribute to the increased passing game and becomes more of a reliable option, especially since this is redshirt senior year. He is done after this year. This is the last year of eligibility, so wants to make the most of it over the course of his senior campaign there. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we take one of our transfers in. So I'm going to take CJ Madden on the D line there. Comes in from Georgia, 4-star recruit in the class of 2022. Didn't see a lot of playing time, minimal playing time, should I say, at Georgia. And that's no shade. Like, obviously, Georgia's defense over the last few years since Madden has enrolled has been elite and has been spectacular. If he hasn't been in the rotation, it's not due to lack of talent. It's due to the plethora of talent that exists down there. So Madden transfers out, gets a fresh start up in Purdue, and has an opportunity to make an immediate impact for this team that's in the process of rebuilding. So if that's the case, and he can bring that 4-star level of talent to Purdue, and he can be that immediate impact player for the team, then that D-line will improve pretty spectacularly, seemingly overnight. And it's definitely what you want to see from your program's defense in year 2 for Ryan Walters. You want to see them take that step as a team, and a player like CJ Madden can be the guy to get that done. So moving on to the team I've got in 17th place. Seems strange to say 17th place, but when you have no divisions, when you have 4 new teams, the Big Ten is gigantic. But I'm going to take a team with a pretty seasoned head coach, but is in the process of a rebuild right now, and that'll be Minnesota. PJ Fleck's actually a coach that I really admire and look up to. I think when you think of winning the right way, like, PJ Fleck is one of those guys that I consider amongst that league, and someone that's always done a lot more than what he's perceived to have, right? Like, he's always accomplished more with lesser talent in a conference that is so top heavy. And Minnesota's a sneaky good team year after year after year. Kind of took a step back last year, expect to take more of a step back this year as they continue to rebuild. But as far as we're concerned, it's not going to be due to the coaching. It's just due to the influx of talent coming in and coming out of Minnesota over the years. There's a lot of new pieces in place this year that we don't know what they're going to look like at the moment. They could surprise us. They could shock us all. None of these predictions are set in stone. It's in the name. It's a prediction. So you could see a team at the bottom and think, oh, they're going to win it all. You could see a team at the top and say they're overrated. But Minnesota, I think, is just going to take a step back this year as they regroup and reevaluate what they're looking for. But, PJ Fleck is in year 8, obviously has a great connection with, the school, the program, the team, et cetera. Runs multiple style offense. So you got a little bit of everything there, and then a 4-3 base defense. So from that, we're going to take a look at their depth chart real quick in terms of what they're bringing to the table. O-line is the room I got the most questions about. Just a couple of experienced pieces. Quinn Carroll comes in, or comes back, excuse me. Tyler Cooper has some, experience under his belt. I'm going to try to get this name correctly there on the left tackle there. Ariante Ersuri. I think I did that all right for a first try. That's experiences there. So at least 3 pieces on the line that you can rely on. Then a couple rotation players, younger players that are going to look to build that experience this year. So the O-line as itself should be okay. It's not going to be elite. It's not going to be terrible. It's going to be kind of somewhere in the middle. Kind of the same for the running back room. Darius Taylor hasn't had a ton of experience under his belt. Playing pretty heavily as a true freshman, but not getting always first team snaps. He is going to get that opportunity this year. And I know they run multiple style offense, but when I think of Minnesota, I think about a pretty aggressive run game. Guys like Mo Ibrahim in the past, and Darius Taylor will be the guy to take that spot this year as the number 1. In terms of the rest of the team, receiver or on offense, the receiver room is pretty solid. You got a couple of good receivers there at the top of your screen there. So Elijah Spencer and Daniel Jackson are a pretty dynamic 1-2 punch. It's a receiver room that should be realistically top 5 in the conference. And, that's what you want to see out of a Minnesota team, that's continuing to grow and continuing to develop, especially since some of those pieces are a little bit more senior. But then if you look at the O-line, if you look at the running back room, a little bit younger in nature. So if you got a good established receiver room with a couple of 800-yard guys, a couple of 8-touchdown, 9-touchdown guys, that does a number for your team's confidence. So if defenses know they got to protect the secondary just as much as they got to attack the run game, it gives you some options if you're Minnesota. And then a very intriguing option for Minnesota is going to be Max Brosmer coming in at quarterback. So he is a transfer from University of New Hampshire, FCS school, where over the last few years, Brosmer has evolved as to one of the better quarterbacks at the FCS level. I think he can come in and be a top 5 quarterback. And, the unprovenness at the FBS level is what's going to deter some people. I think Brosmer is ready to take that step for Minnesota. This is his NFL ready year, so to speak, where he bubbles up the same way that Cam Moore did when he went to Washington State, the same way that Shadur Sanders did when he went to Colorado. Those FCS guys can play at this level, and if they're getting the starts necessary at Power 5 and high tier Group of 5 programs, they'll get the spotlight that they're looking for as they prepare for NFL draft and beyond. So I'm really excited to see Brosmer play for Minnesota and see what he brings to the table. I think he's got a lot of talent, and I think he's ready to take that next step. The defensive side of the ball, I do think Minnesota will be a little weaker defensively than on offense. D-line is solid. D-line is going to be all right. You do have Danny Strigo, who's in that rush position, which I guess is kind of probably like an edge rusher, linebacker D-line hybrid. I think he's the highlight of that D-line, combined with Jaw Joyner on the D end. So plenty of options up front. Going to be a middle to lower middle D-line as far as what I've seen. Linebacker room is where I've got some questions. I think, Cody Lindenberg is talented. No doubt there. Maverick Baranowski, Baranowski is talented in his own right as well. So you got a duo there, but in a 4-3, you don't need a duo, you need a trio. And we'll get into Joey Gerlach in a second. I guess it's a spoiler to a slide coming up. But having two established linebackers is fantastic, but having that third is what prevents them from being do you know uh, fantastic so far. DB room kind of similar to the D line. I think the DB room is the best room on this defense right now. You get Ethan Robinson coming in from Bucknell, but really outside of that, I like Jack Henderson coming back there. Justin Wally at the corner. So you got a couple of pieces that really stand out for Minnesota on that front. I think it's going to be, again, an average DB room. And I think as a whole, the defense is going to be the part that struggles the most. They got a lot more youth on that, on that defense than the offense does. The offense is pretty senior in its own right, but the defense is where you got a lot of young guys playing. So there's going to be some growing pains. There's going to be some issues, but in time, everyone will improve to the level that you kind of expect to at Minnesota. So on the offensive side of the ball breakout player is going to be Philip Daniels on that O line. Redshirted last year, not a whole lot of information about the guy, but I think he's ready to start at that right tackle role. I think he's ready to step up and be, one of the protectors of Max Brosmer and create that space for a running game, create that time for a passing game. I think, PJ Fleck has his guy on the right side of the field, and, time will tell how that works out with the other pieces of the O-line that are a little bit more experienced. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we'll go with Joey Gerlach. So again, not a ton of experience. Kid's coming in as a redshirt sophomore. Predominantly has either redshirted or played on special teams. Hasn't blown up on the stat sheet so far, and this is going to be the year that he has that opportunity. Again, in a 4-3 defense, you don't need a dynamic duo; you need a dynamic trio. And I'm really looking to see what Gerlach can do in that role now that he's going to be more of a permanent starter for this Minnesota team. So moving on now to the 16th place team in the conference, team that's kind of starting from scratch, team that's rebuilding, not considered a football powerhouse by any means, but always want to get up to that level and face the challenge that lies ahead. And honestly speaking, a team that I think could shock a few folks when you look at what they've brought in, but that's going to be Indiana. So the Kurt Cignetti era has begun in Indiana, where it comes over from James Madison, a James Madison team that I believe went 11-1 last year. I haven't done the Sun Belt research yet, and a lot of those players came with them. Now, were they playing Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and Oregon at James Madison? No, they were not. Does that mean that the talent that was there is not necessarily good enough to compete in the Big Ten? Probably not. Probably not enough to win it. I think that's a fair statement, but there's a lot of talented guys that are, coming into this roster this year from James Madison and beyond, and they're looking to make a difference. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time for, Cignetti there, but generally speaking, with that spread offense attack and a multiple 4-2-5 defense and all the transfers that have been brought in, you'll see the impact that, a change in culture and a change of coach and change of, starting roster looks like on a program, even if it is Indiana. So looking at the depth chart, you basically see all gold because, they hit the portal hard, and honestly for the better, a lot of good pieces coming in there. So going room by room, let's start with the O-line first, potentially the best O-line in the Big Ten. I said what I said. There's a lot of key dynamic pieces there, whether they came in from James Madison or they stayed in the program. You have four pretty permanent starters in the past there between Carter Smith, Tyler Stevens, Mike Kadick, and then Nick Kidwell. So you bring in, Stevens comes in from James Madison as well as Kidwell. So you bring in the two guards. And then you bring in Trey Weedig from Wisconsin, who has a fair amount of experience under his belt as well. And as a result, you end up with one of the most experienced offensive line and talented offensive line in the Big Ten. If you look now at the receiver room, going to be up there as well. You bring in Elijah Sarrett, who comes in from James Madison. You keep Donovan McCulley on board, who one of the best receivers on the team last year. You bring in Miles Price from Texas Tech. You bring in Zach Horton at the tight end role from James Madison, who's a red zone threat and someone that every defense needs to keep an eye on. And as a result of that, you end up with an experienced and proven wide receiver room that defenses need to be aware of just across the board. Uh, from a QB perspective, you bring in Curtis Rourke from Ohio, and I think this is a great addition. I think this is a fantastic pickup. I think Curtis Rourke comes in and potentially ends up as a top 5 QB in the conference. And that's just based on the fact that he's poised, he's experienced, he's a winner, all of what you need to build a young program in Indiana or under a new head coach. So Rourke is that guy. This is his last year, and then wherever he goes off to afterwards, and he's looking to make a name for himself in a Power 5 conference after being a major contributor at Ohio for so many years. And then at running back, you bring in Justice Ellison out of Wake Forest. So another talented back in his own right, and someone that Wake Forest has relied on for many years, and now looking to make an impact in a new home in Indiana. On the defensive side of the ball, again, there's a lot of talent up front. The D-line is one of the better ones in the conference. If you look at what they bring in, James Carpenter comes in, again, from James Madison. You bring in Mikhail Kamara, comes in from James Madison. You're going to get a theme of this coming really quick. CJ West comes in from Kent State, so not James Madison. And then Linnell Carr Jr. is one of your few returnees on that side of the ball. So you brought in the best of the best from James Madison and implemented them in a system where they can succeed immediately. Same with the linebacker room. You bring in Aiden Fisher and Jalen Walker, both from, say it again, James Madison. That's a top 5 duo in the conference. And, especially when you run a 4-2-5, it's going to be big, and they have that chemistry. They've played together. They know what they're doing, and now they're just changing their colors up from James Madison colors over to cream and crimson. And the DB room is the one I've got the most amount of concern about. You do bring in Sean Asbury, this one from Old Dominion, so same state as James Madison, but not quite. And then D'Angelo Pons, who comes in from James Madison. So that's a good 1-2 punch with the safety corner. But then from there, the rest are a little bit younger, less experienced, everything along those lines. So for Indiana on the offensive side of the ball, I'm going to go with Justice Ellison as your breakout player. Comes in from Wake Forest. And then, one of the many highlights that the guys had over the last year would have been his 137-yard rushing performance against Georgia Tech. I think we got a clip of that here and what that looks like. Just the type of runner that Indiana is now going to have that they did not have last year. So with that, takes the handoff, patient, waits for the hole, and then gets out. Not the most explosive runner per se, but just, that's a big run there. Picked up probably 30. So, we can run it back real quick, but just waits for the hole to open and then just takes off, gets it down to almost first and goal. Let's run it back one more time to see just how long. They're on the 38, let's say. Just, it takes its time. It goes from the 38 to about the 12, so it's like a 26-yard run. But that ball carrier vision is such an important trait for a team that needs an established back, and they have one with Justice Ellison. They have one now through the transfer portal, and Indiana now has a reliable option in a position of great need, just immediately out of the bat. Immediately off the bat. On the defensive side of the ball, now we're going to move on. On the defensive side of the ball, I am going to go with Amari Farrell, Rover sophomore there. So he'll be in kind of that hybrid, nickel safety, linebacker, like whatever, that kind of like that duo type position. He can play up, he can play back. Had a 7 tackle performance against Rutgers last year, but otherwise kind of a quiet year for him. So, looking to make a bigger splash this year. And this is one of your homegrown players as well. This is someone that was a true freshman playing in Indiana and is a committed Hoosier to this program, to this defense, and beyond. So really looking to see that one of the loyal players that stayed around Indiana, get an opportunity to start, get an opportunity to make an impact, and establish Indiana in the Big Ten as a legitimate threat. I know historically speaking that has not been the case, but with a new coach, new personnel, new players, everything along those lines, there might be some magic in the air in Bloomington. But it's going to take a big effort from a guy like Farrell to step up and show people why him staying was the correct move for everyone involved. So moving on to our 15th place team. It is going to be one of our newcomers. It is going to be one of our friends from out west, and it's going to be the one that has the most to rebuild moving forward. I think we can figure out who that is. It really is down to two. It's not Oregon. It's not USC, but it is going to be UCLA. So the most to rebuild. I think Washington's still a little bit ahead of them. And you'll see Washington down the line, what I've got to say about them. But 15th place, we've got UCLA. So Chip Kelly is gone. He is off to Ohio State to be their offensive coordinator. And then you got Deshaun Foster coming in as year one head coach. Already on staff previously, he was the running backs coach for UCLA. Guy played in the league, super legit, knows his ball, and, looking forward to seeing what he can do as a first-year head coach for UCLA. A kind of up and down year for them last year. They did beat USC, which, kind of love to see if you're a UCLA fan. And, that's their highlight of the year. And, generally is a pretty pedestrian year otherwise. But that's been the case for UCLA the last few years. They've always been floating around the middle. And I think they take a step back this year, their first year in the Big Ten, just too much change immediately for them to compete right now. But, with those California kids in their backyard that they can recruit from, if you have a head coach that immediately cares and wants to step up and make an impact, UCLA will always have the opportunity to be a threat to any conference and win any game. So with first-year head coach Deshaun Foster, you run a spread option offense as well as a 4-3 defense. So looking at the depth chart real quick, a lot of change on the defensive side of the ball. The offensive side of the ball is pretty straightforward. So let's just go piece by piece there. O-line is stacked. I'll give you that. They return 4 out of 5 starters. Only non-starter is Sam Yoon. Everyone else there is going to be a starter on the offensive line. I have Bruno Finna. I know some of these get changed around. I think I did my numbers before I updated that depth chart, and our depth charts come from Our Lads. I believe is the name of the website. So just check it out. You can just search UCLA depth chart for reference. But theoretically speaking, you'll have 4 starters coming back on the offensive line there: Bruno Finna, Spencer Holstedge, Josh Carlin, and then Garrett Giorgio. There we go. It's a mouthful. But a lot of experience there, a lot of talent up front, and a good place to be if you are a quarterback or a running back early in this new coaching change. So receiver room, again, a lot of players coming back there. J. Michael Sturdivant is your number 1 guy for UCLA. He's a player out there. Logan Loya, great option at the slot. You'll have a lot of opportunities there. Your tight end is solid with Moliki Matavo. So plenty of options for the quarterback to open up the field a little bit. I think your O-line is going to be top 5 in the conference. I think your receiver room will be upper half. And then quarterback room is just a little bit less proven. With Dante Moore was starting as a true freshman, lost the job about halfway through, and that's where Ethan Garbers took over. but generally speaking, not a ton of experience as a starter on his front. And then the running back room is a combination of TJ Harden and Anthony Adkins, and it's a 1-2 punch that puts them right near the top of the conference from a running back room perspective. From the defense, this is where I think UCLA loses the majority of their games. Their D-line is questionably experienced, let's say. You got Jacob Busick. So option there. He comes in from From Navy, I believe. So really outside of that, though, it's, it's who? Gary Smith, he's had some flashes, he's had some moments, but it's a D line that, generally speaking, has not, experienced a ton of opportunity to play, ton of opportunity to experience Pac-12 and now Big Ten play. The linebacker room, I think, is pretty solid. Oluwafemi Oladejo is going to be my guess of how you say that one. He's probably the best player on defense for any portion there. Combine that with Kane Medrano, so you have some options across the board. You have some pieces that are going to work out well for you, and then from there we look at the DB room. I think this is another room that's going to struggle. You have KJ Wallace coming in from Georgia Tech. I think he's pretty legit. Brian Addison comes in from Oregon. I think those two are your 1-2 punch back there. The rest I'm a little bit more questionable of. Jalen Davies has his moments as well. But as far as I'm concerned, the DB room is going to be one of the weaker ones in the Big Ten coming out of this year. So when we look at the offensive breakout player, I will go with Ethan Garbers. I'll go with the QB. One of the opportunities there to step up and play large. So had a 3 touchdown performance against USC last year. Had a 269-yard passing performance against Colorado. So I believe won both games. Colorado's only in conference win was Arizona State, I think. So that's 2 big wins for a quarterback that hasn't got a ton of experience playing. So I clipped one of those passing TDs against USC. So let's take a look at that real quick. And it's just him knowing his receiver. So in motion, snaps, fakes the handoff, sits back in the pocket, just rolls or doesn't roll out, but steady, and then just hits the wide open man. Like, just knows his routes, has the vision. So I mean, the receiver draws the defense that way, sits back, has the time, doesn't freak out. And then there's a wide open receiver that he nails. I think it's his tight end. So just making passes like that, being consistent, being that game manager, it goes a very, very long way to the success of a team, especially with a first-year head coach that's still figuring it out. But I expect Garbers to take that next step as a quarterback and as a leader on this team, and be a pretty key difference maker as to the result of any games that UCLA is in on both sides. I think if he plays great, they're going to win a lot of games. If he's not so great, they'll be where we predict them to be. Then on the defensive side of the ball, I'll take Ramon Hernandez. Hernandez is coming in from Notre Dame, so played his fair share of tough offenses over the course of his time at Notre Dame. Did have a 2 pass defended game against Stanford last year. And, so that's a Pac-12 opponent. Now they're over in the ACC. I know Stanford's not a powerhouse at the moment, but it is still what was then Power 5 play. And, we've seen the competition that Notre Dame faces year after year after year. So we know that Hernandez is up for the challenge. We know he's ready to take that step. And it's just going to be a matter of taking advantage of this opportunity. I think he'll be the full-time safety on the strong side there for this upcoming year. And, he's ready to evolve and make that move as a full-time player. So really looking forward to seeing what he can accomplish over there. Now, moving on to 14th place. This is a team I think has a lot of hype around them right now, and I think is ready to potentially make a big move. I think they take a step back. I think, the combination of the schedule they have this year combined with kind of the underperformance they had last year is going to lead to another potentially disappointing year, and that will be Wisconsin. So year two for Luke Fickell, had a solid year last year, probably not to the Wisconsin standard. I think of them over the last 10 years as traditionally winning, uh, you know, I mean, 8, 9, 10 games, conference championship appearances, stuff like that. That was not the case in year one for Luke Fickell. And I don't think it's going to be the case in year two. I think they're still in that rebuild process. They're not ready to take that next step. And it might take a little bit of time, like, switching so drastically from the run attack that Wisconsin has had for years to a high power air raid offense. It takes time and it takes adjustment. You got to have the right guys and the right pieces. I think Wisconsin is figuring that out along the way. And then on the defense, you have a 2-4-5. So quite different than what you traditionally see. You see a lot of 3-3-5s right now. You see a lot of 4-2-5s right now. So Wisconsin may have the right idea, but as a result of that, you may be ignoring some of the pressure up front that's needed. So we'll see what that looks like on their depth chart here. On the offensive side of the ball, starting off first with the O-line, I mean, no question. When I think of Wisconsin, I think of a great O-line year after year after year. They got 4 starters returning. They have Jack Nelson is back. Jake Renfro is back. Joe Huber is back. Riley Mahlman is back. The only one that's not a starter is Joe Bruner, but he's a pretty rotational player from my investigation and my understanding. So 4 out of 5 is fantastic. You're bringing a lot of experience back. You're bringing a lot of starts and snaps and everything that a great O-line needs to have under its belt to protect your quarterback and create space and time and separation for everyone else out there. The receiver room is average. You do have a few high level players out there. Will Pauling has shown flashes of greatness. Bryson Green has his moments and his opportunities, but other than that, it's a pretty pedestrian room. And that probably will change with the air raid that's been used by Fickell in the past. So expect some of those guys to have pretty big years that haven't had big years already. But we've seen just from 2 of them the possibilities of what is possible. You get Tyler Van Dyke coming in from Miami. I think he has a lot of upside and a lot of potential. Didn't really work out at Miami, towards the end, but I think in a new system and with a new head coach, he could live up to those expectations. I think he's a top 5 quarterback in the Big Ten kind of immediately, and has a lot to prove this year on a team that's going to go through the gauntlet of the Big Ten. And then from a running perspective, you do have Ches Mulisi, who I think is fairly average as well, fairly pedestrian, even though he is close to a 1,000-yard rusher. Last season, I do want to see him take that next step as a runner this year, especially with the majority of the focus on him with the running game. So with that, on the defensive side, in a 2-4-5, the D-line does not have a ton of experience between those tackles there. James Thompson's pretty solid in his own right. He's got a little bit of playing time, but Kurt Neal has not had a lot of playing time. And when you're a 1-2 punch, you better punch twice. And, Neal hasn't done that yet. Not saying he can't, not saying he won't, just hasn't happened yet. The linebacker room, I think, is also pretty pedestrian and below average. You have, again, pieces. Jake Chaney is a legit linebacker for you in there, as are John Pius on the right side. Daryl Peterson is solid in his own right, but again, it's a team. Again, it's a combination. And we'll remember, John Pius comes in from William and Mary, so that's that gold one there. But he'll make a splash, he'll make an impact pretty instantly. But can it compete with the rest of the Big Ten? That's what I want to ask everyone. DB room will. It's a good-looking DB room. So if you look out there, Hunter Wohler is one of the best safeties in the conference, if not the country. He's partnered out there with Kamoi Latu, right next to him. He's a pretty spectacular safety in his own right. And then really around them, Niger for Korean. I'm going to guess that's how you say that. Pretty solid cornerback out there. Ricardo Hallman, Austin Brown. Like there's playmakers at all five spots. So I'm not worried about the DB room. I think it's one of the better ones in the conference. So how does that lead to our breakout players of the year? So starting off, I'm going to go with the run game, something that Wisconsin is always going to be known for, regardless if they switch to air raid, and that's going to be Chez Mulisi. I assume it's not Shea, but Chez Mulisi had missed 9 games last year with an injury. So with that, I think that's what have prevented him from kind of avoiding this breakout player this year. I want to see how he rebounds coming back from that injury. That game against Buffalo was pretty dynamic in its own right. 157 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. I believe we have that one clipped. Yes, we do. So let's take a look at how he is as a rusher. Hands off, avoids the first few guys, runs right through the middle. Dekes what I assume safety. Nice cut the other way, and he's gone. That was an 89-yard run, I believe. And I know it's Buffalo. I know it's not your traditional Big Ten opponent, but the ball carrier vision is spectacular. The downfield speed and the aggression, all of that is what you want to see out of your RB1. And from what we've seen so far, Malusi can be that guy for Wisconsin. He can be the one that opens up the field. And I know it's air raid, and you're going to see a lot more of the receivers involved. But if you got a running back that you can rely on for 4, 5, 6, 7 yards a run every single time, it's going to keep defenses guessing, and it's going to keep them honest. So having Malusi back there and having a big year, it's going to go a long way for Wisconsin. And then let's see, that's going to play again. We're going to skip past it. Defensive side of the ball, we're going to go with Kurt Neal. So I said hasn't had the opportunity yet. Now he will. He's projected to be the starter on that D-line. Had a 3-tackle performance against Iowa last year. Looking for more. Kind of been rotational in the past, but going to be that guy that's, to my understanding, a full-time starter this year. Ready to take that step up. Ready to be the man on the left side of that D-line who's going to hunker down, plug holes, and stop running backs in their tracks. If he can do that, he can apply that pressure that Wisconsin is looking for, especially with some of those high-power offenses they're going to be going up against. They have Alabama in week 3 coming to their home, and if they want to shock the world, it's going to require a big-time performance out of that D-line. And Kurt Neal is the guy I believe can step up and showcase that he's ready to make a move for Wisconsin. So moving on to 13th place, another team in a rebuild, another team with some parts and pieces moving around. Kind of a more favorable job for anyone kind of looking in at of the rebuilds. I think this one is probably going to be the quickest, and it's just due to state of the program, resources, everything along those lines, and that'll be Michigan State. Jonathan Smith comes in from Oregon State, where he had quite a strong performance. It's in his alma mater. It's, he's coached some of the best teams in school history since he was head coach there. And, with them basically getting demoted, with the way that shook out in the Pac-12, Jonathan Smith is off to the Big Ten to take on his next challenge with Michigan State with a multiple style offense, a 4-2-5 style rotating defense. And, really a program coming out of a pretty severe controversy with Mel Tucker, just looking for a level of, normalcy and standards moving forward that Jonathan Smith is known for, especially at a smaller program like Oregon State. So when we look at their depth chart, it's obviously going to be a lot of gold. That comes with the territory of bringing in, coming into a new team and bringing your guys with you. If we look at the offensive side of the ball, I think Michigan State is going to struggle this year. This is where I think Michigan State is going to lose the majority of their games. So, offensive line, a lot of question marks, a lot of new people, a lot of new names out there. You bring in Luke Newman from Holy Cross. You bring in Tanner Miller from Oregon State. And really outside of that, you have Brandon Baldwin over there, who is going to do his thing as a returning somewhat starter. But other than that, it's a lot of rotational guys. It's a lot of question marks. It's a lot of figuring out how we're going to fit this all together. Same with the receiver room. The guys you brought back at the top of your screen, not a ton of production. You have Monterey Foster Jr. is the only one who's had more than 500 yards and even recorded a touchdown at any point in his college career. You do bring in Jack Velling from a tight end point of view from, again, Oregon State. And, that's going to be someone you can rely on pretty instantly. One of the better tight ends in the country from a just purely red zone threat perspective. At quarterback, you bring in Aiden Childs, again from Oregon State, a guy with a lot of potential, guy with a lot of promise, who doesn't have a ton of experience under his belt, but is going to get a ton of experience this year as the starter. And then at running back, you have Nate Carter, who is one of your returning starters there. Again, not a ton of he's had his touches in the past for sure, but not a lot of dynamic experience across the board. So again, I don't see any part of this room, any room on the offensive side of the ball that is actively elite. Generally speaking, just due to lack of experience, a lot of these rooms are going to struggle. And I don't anticipate Michigan State's going to put up a ton of points this year. But I could be wrong. Been wrong before on this channel. Not going to be the end of the world. Not going to be the first time. Defensive side of the ball is where I like Michigan State a lot more. D-line is pretty impressive. You bring in a couple of strong players. You bring in Quindarius Dunnigan from Middle Tennessee. You bring in Daquan Dowse from Georgia Tech. And then you retain Maverick Hansen. You retain Chris Bogle. So definitely a lot of playmakers up front. One of the better D-lines in the conference. I think they're top 5. Linebacker room, I think, is going to be upper part of that top 5 when you bring in Wayne Matthews III from Old Dominion. You bring in Jordan Turner from Wisconsin. Pair that with Jordan Hall, who's returning. And you have a pretty solid 1-2-3 punch. Really like Wayne Matthews, that linebacker. Could be one of the best linebackers in the conference when we're all said and done. DB room, I think, where I think they're going to have some problems. It's a below average DB room. It's not worse than anything we see on the offensive side of the ball, but the DB room is the worst part of this defense from what we've seen right now from an experience perspective. You do bring in Ed Woods from Arizona State. But outside of that, Malik Spencer at the nickelback role, he's good in his own right, as is Dylan Tatum. But you got to look at what you're surrounding yourself with. So a couple of dynamic pieces is fine, but you'd love to have all 5 if possible back there. So with that, we're going to go with our breakout player on offense. It'll be Nate Carter. So couple of good performances over the course of last year. 111 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns against Richmond, and then 108 yards rushing against Iowa. Had 4 touchdowns total all of last year, 3 of them against Richmond. So we definitely want to see him in a more active role, driving the ball downfield. Richmond is an FCS squad, so you got a stat pad when you can. But 108 against Iowa, that's not bad. Iowa's known for having their dynamic defense across the board. So, can't be too bad if that's what he's doing, but definitely want to see him more involved in the offense this year, especially with so many pieces up in the air across any and all of those rooms over there. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we're going to go with Armorian Smith, one of our safeties there. Picked up a tackle against Richmond and Central Michigan, and then a pass defended against Washington. I imagine that means he stuck his paw up there against Michael Penix. So, if he's playing that way, on a let's call them what they were last year, they were a bad Michigan State team, and he was playing, Michael Penix hard. It means that there's potential for him as a starter full time. So he's going to get his chances. He's going to get his opportunities. And, if Michigan State is successful, especially on the defensive ball, especially in the DB room, it's going to be large in part to a big year from Armorian Smith. So with that, I'm going to move on to number 12. So I believe that means 6 down, 12 to go. We're a third of the way done. This is kind of one of your pretty consistently mid-tier teams in the conference, and 12 is a pretty mid-tier spot to place them, and that'll be Illinois. So Brett Bielema is back for year 4, had a pretty average year last year, a little bit, below bowl eligibility, but right around that 500 mark. I think they're looking for more this year. I think there's a very legitimate chance that Illinois does end up in the bowl eligibility conversation. So probably right around where they finished last year record-wise, but maybe a step or two up. And instead of 4th place in the Big Ten West, they are now 12th place in the Big Ten overall. So with that, they're running a spread offense and a multiple 3-4 defense. Let's take a look at what the depth chart looks like. So a couple of additions from across the board. O-line's looking nice. They're bringing a couple of good options. They bring in J.C. Davis, who is coming in from, let me see, New Mexico. And then you bring in Kevin Wigington from Michigan State, and you combine that with 2 returning starters in Josh Kreutz and Zy Chrysler, and you have and then even Josh Geske has had his fair share of starts and playing time, so definitely not a bad O-line by any means. I would say it's definitely upper pack or upper half in the conference, so potentially upper third if you want to look at it that way. So no worries on that front. Receiver room, a little bit of a drop down, but as far as I'm concerned, it is a solid one in their own right. They're definitely upper half. Pat Bryant is someone to watch out for in a good way. They bring in Mario Sanders from JUCO. They have a great tight end, Cole Rusk. So there are options at the receiver room this year, at least 2 established ones and 2 that we're in the process of establishing. So it's a strong receiver room for Illinois as far as I'm concerned. Luke Altmaier is a decent quarterback, probably a little bit below average in the conference, but gets the job done. I don't think Illinois is ever going to have an elite quarterback. I'm trying to think. I mean, they had Tommy DeVito. They had him after Syracuse, but I don't think of elite QB play when I think of Illinois. So I think you got to get good enough play. Altmaier can bring that to you. Altmaier can bring that to Illinois. He can be the good enough QB, and that'll help them win games. And then we have Caden. I'm going to say Fegan is going to be my guess there. Not a ton of experience or playing time on his end at running back, looking to make a splash this year in that room. On the defensive side of the ball, knowing that it is a 3-4, you bring in Dennis Briggs from Florida State. I think he immediately becomes your top player on the D-line. It's a D-line, as far as I'm concerned, that is kind of weak. Illinois, at least from what I've gathered, is probably weaker on the defense than they are on the offensive side of the ball, because outside of Dennis Briggs, I don't see a lot of returning production. So you got to make that production this year. I just haven't seen it yet. And I base a lot of these predictions off what we've seen in the past. Linebacker room is decent. You have Dylan Rosiak. You have Seth Coleman back there. I'd even think Kanena Odelugu and Gabe Jacas are respectable in their own rights and building themselves up as a linebacker room. So it's going to be an average room. It's nothing to it's not going to shock the world. But if they have a big year, I'm not going to be particularly stunned. If they have a bad year, I'm not going to say, well, everyone saw that coming. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. DB room, I think, is another question mark one. It's probably between the 2. Or between the 3, it's probably the middle of those 3 rooms. It's towards the bottom end of the Big Ten. Just again, looking at experience, you have Miles Scott back there at safety. You have Xavier Scott back there at nickelback. You have Tyler Strain at corner, and then you have a lot of it, as far as when I've concerned, inexperience. You got some young players back there that haven't had the consistent playing time that we need to make a proper evaluation. So 3 out of 5 is not bad, but you love to see 4, and you love to see 5 out of 5. So with that offensive player, breakout player on for Illinois will be Caden Fegan. So 97 yards rushing and a touchdown against Wisconsin. And then as a pass threat, had a 59-yard receiving day and touchdown against Minnesota. So guy who can play both. And again, true sophomore, so played all this as a true freshman, made an immediate impact for Illinois. And will continue to do so this year. Will be the feature back this year in the top individual there. Yeah, he had 95 carries last year. I'm sure that's going to hit triple digits, high 100s, low 200s potentially, depending on how it all shakes out. But Caden Fegan's a guy to watch as he takes over the keys as the main guy in the running back room for Illinois this year. And then defensively, we're going to go with Alex Bray. Played as a true freshman, more so as a rotational special teams guy. Had a 2-tackle performance against Wisconsin, but otherwise hasn't seen the field all too much. Now he's going to be in the trenches. He's not going to be on kickoff. He's not going to be on punt return or punt block or nothing like that. He's going to be facing off against those O-linemen the way that he came here to play. So looking to see how that turns out. Looking to see how he evolves as a pass rusher, how he evolves as a block shedder, everything like that. But Alex Bray is going to be your breakout player on Illinois' D-line this year. So moving on to number 11, team that overcame a ton of obstacles last year to shock the world just by being good enough, and I think is ready to take another big step this year, and that'll be Northwestern. So hats off to David Braun for what he came into last year and what he accomplished. So David Braun was a coordinator hired over the course of that offseason. Pat Fitzgerald gets hired. That it was a team that the year before went 1-11, did not win a single game on the continental, on the continent of North America. Won their one game in Ireland. So from there, David Braun takes over a Northwestern team that was already getting beat on. Their longtime head coach is fired, and David Braun steps into the line of fire and just wins. They had an 8. No one said Northwestern was winning 8 games last year. Like anyone who said, "Oh, I got that. I predicted that," they're lying to you. That never happened. So they won 8 games. I don't think they can replicate that this year, but I still anticipate a solid, respectable season for Northwestern again this year as they continue to defy the odds. It's a spread offense and a multiple 4-3 style defense, and definitely going to be interesting to see how they live up to last year's expectations. So when we look at the depth chart, obviously Northwestern, not a lot of transfers coming in. Northwestern is like the Stanford and Vanderbilt and Duke type schools where UC Berkeley, where you gotta have your grades in order to even sniff a transfer application. And as a result of that, you got to build the program from within. You got to recruit. It's almost like a service academy when you think about it, with how demanding the entrance possibilities are, combined with the lack of transfer opportunity into the program. So as a result, though, you build a great culture and you get the right guys, you can do something special. So if we look at the team across the board, O-line got some questions. Not a lot of returning production there. You can see a lot of sophomores starting. You do see some grad school individuals, but even then, a lot of those guys are rotational players. So it's an O-line that's been very shaky, doesn't have a lot of returning production, and is going to be a question mark for the future. The receiver room will be okay. It's going to be middle of the pack. Bryce Kurtz up in that wide receiver Z. He's had a 700-yard season. He's had a 5-touchdown season. Not worried about that. AJ Henning plays well in the slot. You got a couple of tight ends that you run, a couple bunch formations. You have Marshall Lang, who's your go-to guy in the red zone. So as far as we're concerned from a receiver perspective and tight end perspective, I don't see too many issues there. I think it'll be good enough, and I think Northwestern might end up being a little bit more pass first this year. Um, QB room, we got a new guy in there, Jack Lausch. Um, Next to no experience and taking over the reins. Curious to see what he's going to do. And then at the running back, you have Cam Porter, solid enough, kind of like that receiver room, a average to below average running back. But yeah, I mean, from a skill position perspective, Northwestern's in a pretty solid spot, especially for Northwestern. O-line is going to be a problem. QB is going to be a problem. But receivers and running back are fine for Northwestern standards, as well as many programs in the Big Ten would like to have that type of situation. So I got no issues with the skill spots there, but QB and O-line are going to be the ones we got to watch for Northwestern this year. Defense, kind of the same story where the D line has some issues, but then the linebacker room and the DB room are solid. So D line, you have Richie Haggerty, who's coming from a 6-sack performance in the past, but outside of that, you got a lot of up and down rotational players, some inexperience, everything along those lines. But the linebacker room is another, example of an average room within the conference. Xander Mueller is one of your better linebackers in the conference. He carries this room. I got to take into consideration everyone. Xander Mueller is good enough for this linebacker room to take a otherwise bad spot in this defense and upgrade it to a serviceable one. Like he carries it on his back, and on the DB side of things, Coco Azima is a fantastic safety. Devin Turner at nickel, another contributor. Theron Johnson at the corner is pretty locked down in his own right. So there's definitely some weapons out there for Northwestern to win this game defensively as well as offensively. They can be in these coin flip games probably a lot longer than some of us predict them to be. So on the offensive side of the ball, the offensive breakout player I have is Nick Herzog. So again, a younger offensive lineman, redshirt sophomore, no starts, no appearances on the actual line from what I've seen. Could be wrong, but hasn't had that consistent playing time necessary for me to evaluate him properly. I think Herzog is going to get his chance this year. I think he's going to have the opportunity to step up and be that player that Northwestern needs of him. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we are going to go with Najee Story, who's on that D line that I talked about earlier. He's going to be on the left defensive tackle. So in his past, he has played a little bit more obviously than Herzog. Had a pass defended against Minnesota, a 2-tackle performance against UTEP. I know it's UTEP, but you got to get your start somewhere. And then getting a pass defended on the D line is hard enough. You get that JJ Watt action. And, I know Minnesota is not known for their passing prowess, but if he's up there, making a play, sticking his paw up and doing what he needs to do, it makes everyone around him, makes their job a lot easier. So he's shown what he can do in snippets, but now it's time to showcase the whole thing. What can he do for Northwestern pretty consistently over the course of the year? How can he make a difference from a Northwestern team that's continuing to grow and to develop? And how can he evolve as a player in his redshirt junior year? So only time will tell, but I think Najee Story's due for a big one. As we enter the top 10, I think this is a team that's got a lot of hype around them as well. A team that you don't consider a powerhouse traditionally in the Big Ten, a team that's usually on the bottom, especially when we had divisions. I think a team that benefits significantly from the dissolving of divisions in the Big Ten. And we're going Jersey's finest. We're going with Rutgers there. Greg Schiano in year 5 definitely has been turning the ship around. If you've seen their recruiting, I think they've got a top 10, 15 class right now. I gotta check 24/7 and on 3 at the moment. But they're recruiting up a storm. They're getting their big players for the future. Rutgers is someone to watch, especially in the era of NIL. There's a lot of damage that Rutgers can do. And I think they're starting to turn the corner. So Shiano's the guy in year 5, did solid last year, made it to a bowl game. and ready for more this year. They're running a spread offense, and they're running a combination of a 4-3, 4-2-5 defense. So let's see what that depth chart looks like. So a couple of transfers here and there, a couple of new additions. So looking at the offense first, O-line is solid. A couple of returning starters there. Gus Zelinskas at center, and then Holland Pierce at the blindside tackle. So a couple of options, couple of opportunities on the D line. Receiver room is solid, especially, or I mean, more than solid. I think it's a top 5 room in the conference. You get a great transfer coming in from Monmouth in Dymere Miller, combining that with Nazim Brantley at the Z. Christian Dramel has had his moments at the slot. So definitely a tight 1-2-3 punch at the Rutgers wide receiver position. You bring in a new quarterback. You bring in Ethan. I'm going to try to get this in one try. Kalakamanis. I don't know. I lived in a Greek part of New York. I should have got that in one go, but we'll figure it out. I always thought he was pretty solid, but he has moved on from Minnesota. They've got their new QB. Rutgers has their new QB. Everyone's kind of trading QBs in this era of college football. And then you do have Kyle. I'm going to get this one in one try too. Monaghy. We'll go with that. Who I think is an average running back for Rutgers, but I mean, has put up a 1,200-yard season in the past. Just looking at him to find the end zone a little bit more, but from a yards and carries perspective, he's definitely earned his stripes in this conference and with this team. So quite a few options there. There's not one piece that I look at and think, Rutgers is in trouble there. Not on the offensive side of the ball for sure. Definitely going to be good enough to get them to bowl eligibility and beyond. Same with the defense. And the defense is better than the offense for Rutgers right now. If you look at the D-line, it's going to be an above-average D-line. You bring in Malcolm Ray from Florida State. You have Aaron Lewis on the DN, who's like your dynamic pass rusher, can play back in coverage if need be. But I am not worried about the D-line and how that comes together for Rutgers this year. I think the D-line being average is the worst part of this Rutgers defense, or slightly above average. The linebacker room is one step up, and the DB room is fantastic. So look at the linebacker room. It is a strong combination there with Mohamed Tor and then Tyreen Powell. Those two go a very, very long way. And have been playing together for a while now. They make a difference every time they're out there. Those are the type of guys that you can circle on the field instantly and see the impact that they have. Whether it's in pass defense, whether it's in rush defense, every angle along the way. And then in the secondary, you have Shaquan Loyal, Flip Dixon, Desmond Igbinosun. We'll get that right. Robert Longerbeam. So, I mean, 4 out of 5. I mean, Eric Rogers is fine in his own right as well. So it's a pretty stacked DB room from from top to bottom everywhere you see. So as far as we're concerned, it's going to be tougher opposing offenses to get an inch or a yard on Rutgers through the air. They're going to have to try to beat them from the ground, and that's going to be just as difficult. So with that in mind, our offensive breakout player for Rutgers is going to be Tyler Needham on the O-line. It's got to be someone coming up there, that hasn't played a ton, and this is that guy. Just hasn't got a ton of experience under his belt, ready to take on the role of full-time starter on the right-hand side of the offensive line, securing that tackle role and taking a big step for Rutgers as a whole this year. I'm very curious to see how he blends and gels with the rest of the offensive line, the impact that he has, and how he can establish himself as that key starter that Rutgers needs on the O-line. On the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to go with Malcolm Ray. Again, it's coming from that D-line. Guy comes in from Florida State, had his moments. On the D-line, had a pass defended against Virginia Tech and a pass defended against Georgia. Virginia Tech was a win, obviously. Georgia was that crushing bowl performance, but got some experience. That's what matters. Got his chance to earn his stripes and get some film before transferring to a new home. And now that he's going to be a full-time player instead of a more rotational player, I anticipate Malcolm Reed makes the most of this experience and this opportunity for Rutgers this year. So moving on to number 9. So we're heading into the top half of the conference right now. This is going to be the second of our. Is going to be the second of our newcomers from the Pac-12, and a team that disappointed a little bit last year. Team that didn't really rise to the occasion, and is looking to do so in a new conference. I think it's going to be a lot easier said than done. That's going to be USC. Lincoln Riley in year 3, definitely disappointed last year. I don't know what they're anticipating for this year, but I don't think they're going to be as competitive in the Big Ten as they were in the Pac-12, and they finished 4th in the Pac-12 last year. So we'll see how it plays out. But obviously, defense has got to get fixed. That was the killer for them last year. You got to replace a former Heisman winner and first overall draft pick at quarterback. So we're going to see how that all works out. But with the type of offense that they run, Lincoln Riley should have no problem putting up points, regardless of who you put out there. And with Alex Grinch gone on defense, and some new faces back there, I think it'll be interesting to see how that shifts out for USC. So when we look at the offensive side of the ball, just do a run through real quick. Again, a lot of this is from a returning production standpoint. The O-line will be below average. You do have Emmanuel Pregnon, and you do have Jonah Monheim coming back as your previous starters. The rest are younger guys that haven't had a ton of playing time and experience. They're going to be asked to step up pretty heavily. Mason Murphy has been a rotational player the last couple of years, got a few starts in last year, but other than that, not a full-time starter by any means. If we look at the receiver room, this is, just due to the sheer amount of loss that they've had on that side of the ball and the youth up there, not a ton of, deliverables that we've seen so far. We saw flashes of it with Deuce Robinson. We've seen flashes of it with Zachariah Branch, but it's never come together quite yet. We're looking to see what they do in a full-time process and the impact that they make on this team for the course of the entire year. Same with Miller Moss, rooting for the guy. When we look at USC teams of the past, I don't have a high opinion of Lincoln Riley, just of how he exited Oklahoma rubbed me the wrong way. And in the era of NIL and unlimited transfer, Miller Moss is a very rootable quarterback. He's the guy that dug his teeth, sat behind Heisman winners, didn't transfer out, embraced the competition, and could have transferred out at the end of last year. But USC committed to him that he is their guy. And, let's see him make the most of it, but hasn't proven it over the course of a full season yet, has proven it in pieces. And then you do bring in Woody Marks at running back from Mississippi State. This is a great pickup from USC. I think he's one of the better running backs in the conference, ready to make an immediate impact and get that extended playing time for USC, knowing that there's such a high-power offense. On the defensive side of the ball, I think the defense actually takes pretty significant strides this year. It's going to be a good-looking D-line. You bring in Nate Clifton from Vanderbilt. You have Bear Alexander coming back there. Jamal Muhammad comes back. So a lot of experience, a lot of pressure that's able to be applied. And as a result, you should have an upper half D-line for sure. Linebacker room will be top 5. DB room will be top 5. So those two combined for quite a bit of impact immediately. You have Easton Mascarenas Arnold coming back, and then you bring in Eric Gentry from Eric Gentry comes in from Oregon State. Actually, it might be the other way around. I apologize. So, either way, you got, one dynamic player who's returning and another dynamic player who is coming in, and that 1-2 punch up the middle is going to be tough for a lot of teams to beat. Same through the air. You have a couple of transfers coming in from UCLA. I thought that was illegal. You can't transfer from rival to rival. But then we saw, Trevor Etienne. But that's for the SEC day. We're gonna worry about him later. But you bring in John Humphrey from UCLA. You bring in Kamari Ramsey from UCLA. You bring in Keely Arnold from Oregon State, and you have Jalen Smith back there returning. I do think this defense is going to be miles better this year than it was in the past. And as a result, if USC is going to surprise some people, I think it's a rebuilding year for them. But if they are going to be some surprising folks, I think it's because the defense steps up in a huge way. So on the offensive side of the ball, our breakout player is going to be Kyron Hudson. So had a touchdown against Arizona and Louisville last year and a 33-yard catch against Cal. So very sparing playing time, right? Has been playing in pieces, so to speak, has had his moments here and there, but nothing really full time. And I anticipate you'll see that full time jump this upcoming year. So I expect a big year from Hudson, especially with Miller Moss back there, new QB, going to look for some options. I imagine Kyron Hudson was on second team for the majority of the year, so I'm sure he's got connection and chemistry with Miller Moss as well. So combine that all together. And, combine the fact that Lincoln Riley is the quote-unquote Heisman whisperer. All three of those receivers are going to be in for pretty big years. But I think Kyron Hudson is going to be the one that's shown us the least and potentially will deliver the most. On the defensive side of the ball, we're going to go with Elijah Hughes up on the D-line. Had half a sack against Louisville, so that would have been their bowl game. Played predominantly on special teams as a true freshman, ready to get into the rotation and ready to make a pretty big impact for USC's defense this year. There's a lot of seniority around him. There's a lot of experience around him. And as a result of that, maybe O-lines take a little bit of time off on Hughes and focus more on double teaming guys like Bear Alexander and Jamal Muhammad, leaving those one-on-one and favorable matchups open for Hughes to take advantage of. I think he can do it. I think he's ready to take that step on the D-line, but time will tell. I think USC's defense is going to be a lot better this year. Their offense probably takes a step back, and we end up with kind of right around the same spot as we were last year. Moving on to eighth place in the Big Ten. Obviously a team that more or less ran the table last year. Another newcomer, and obviously the team that had the biggest kind of 1 year, not 1 year turnaround, but if you look at where they were 2-3 years ago to where they are today, it's pretty spectacular. But we're going to go with Washington. They bring in Jed Fish, new head coach at they bring in Jed Fish out of Arizona to coach at Washington, as Washington's head coach is now at Alabama. And we'll get to that episode in about 2 weeks. But yeah, it's the Fish era has begun at Washington. It's a Washington team that just went to the national championship. Michigan handled business, and we'll get to Michigan down the line. But Jed Fish, pretty spectacular turnaround at Arizona before taking the new role at Washington. I do expect this to be a bit of a rebuild year when you see the talent that they lost to the draft, to the portal. Some people went down to Alabama with Kalen DeBoer, but Jed Fish brought his guys from Arizona. So will it all shake out? How will it work? We're going to see. But it'll be interesting to see how this all works out with the changes on both sides of the ball. We got an air raid offense and a 4-2-5 defense this year coming out of Washington. It'll be interesting to see how that all comes together. If we're looking at the depth chart, obviously with a new head coach, you're going to see a lot of gold on the sheet. So starting with the offensive line, lots of question marks. You do bring in Drew Azzopardi from San Diego State, but the rest are very young O-linemen that do not have a lot of starts under their belt or a lot of games under their belt. So I look at that as a potential problem and a potential weakness for this Washington team. But, I'm curious to see how it shakes out. I'm curious to see how it works for Washington, knowing knowing the success they had last year and how they can try to replicate it this year. I think the O line off the top of the head is going to be the biggest problem for Washington, just due to the inexperience. Receiver room is not far behind. So, with that in mind, you bring in Jeremiah Hunter from Cal. That's your immediate impact player. But outside of that, I look at this list and I think Giles Jackson maybe is your guy. Everyone else is just not experienced enough or doesn't have a lot of tape on them. It could be one of those guys. It could be someone that has a big year. But as far as I'm concerned, you really only have one top tier receiver on a team, especially with air raid. Like, the receivers will get their touches and they'll get their playing time. But from what we've seen from everyone else, it's not enough to evaluate it properly at this time. Now, you do bring in Will Rogers from Mississippi State, who was drastically mismanaged last year when they went from a QB heavy offense to a running back heavy offense, and as a result, his stats have suffered. I think Will Rogers, when he's playing at Mike Leach level offense, is the best quarterback in the Big Ten. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me where I'm wrong with that. He's a 4,000-yard passer in the past. He's a 36 touchdown passer in the past. Why can't he replicate that on an air raid offense in Washington? What did Michael Penix throw for last year? It's probably pretty similar. It's possible for that to happen this year, and it's possible for Will Rogers to be that guy. Running back game, it's going to be pretty pedestrian. You bring in Jonah Coleman from Arizona, so following Jed Fish, I think he's solid. And I think it's, just having one part of that offense established outside of the quarterback is going to go a long way for Washington this year. On the defensive side of the ball, D-line is a little shaky. You do bring a lot of guys in from quite a few different spots. You bring in Isaiah Ward from Arizona. You bring in Sebastian Valdez from Montana State. But really outside of that, you bring in Russell Davis from Arizona as well, who isn't super experienced in his own right, but has had flares and flashes of excellence. So it's a D-line that I'm a little bit questionable about. It's a D-line that I don't think is going to be superior, spectacular to the team around them. Linebacker room is good. Linebacker room is going to be top 5. It's a duo of Carson Bruner and Alfonso Tuputala. Both returning from last year's national championship appearing team, knows what it takes to win, knows what it takes to be a Husky and the pride that comes with it, and can teach that to a lot of these newcomers, especially as leaders on the defense. DB room is going to be a little bit below average. You bring in a couple of transfers. You bring in Ephesians Prysock from Arizona. You bring in Jordan Shaw from Indiana. Combine that with Elijah Jackson at corner. He's pretty locked down. Cameron Fabiculanan is going to be my best attempt at that. So a couple of dynamic players back there. And definitely some names to watch for sure. So definitely interested in seeing how that comes together and how they make the most of that. But it's going to be an average to below average DB room for Washington this year. So moving on to the offensive breakout player of the year, I will take someone on their O-line. I'll take, I'm going to say it's Kali Tafai, redshirt freshman, ready to start on the O-line and, ready to make a name for himself for this Washington team. Didn't play at all last year, redshirted. Well, he might have played sparingly on like special teams, but sat out last year predominantly to keep that red shirt. But I think ready to step up, ready to be that full-time player on the O-line, ready to protect Will Rogers and establish a run game and establish a passing game, everything like that. The game is won in the trenches, and a guy like Tafai is going to be someone that's super impactful for you, especially with a first-year head coach. So really looking forward to seeing what that looks like for Washington on the O-line this year. Defensively, I'm going to go with Jacob Bandes. So I had a 3-tackle performance against Arizona State and Michigan State. 4-star recruit in the class of 2029. I know at this point that is 5 years ago, but it's about living up to that potential. Can he make the most of his last year at not Arizona, at Washington? So never transferred out, never sought an easier opportunity, embraced the challenge that was ahead of him, and made the most of this experience. So I think Bandes is that guy to help anchor down the D line and make an impact, and keep that D line in all those games against some tough O lines that they're going to be facing off against this year. So next up, we got our seventh place team in the Big Ten. It's going to be a team that struggled in the past. It's going to be a team that has, year after year managed to avoid meeting their expectations. This is the year it all changes. Nebraska's back. I'm calling it now. Matt Rule is the guy. He's going to bring Nebraska not back to their former glory, because they had some of the best college teams of all time. They're not that this year. I don't anticipate them being that probably ever again, if we're being honest. Those days are over. But a competitive team in the Big Ten after, under 500 last year, in the Scott Frost era before that, to be back in the thick of things, those fans are going to love it. So year 2 of Matt Rule, did right around the mean of the conference. Rocking a spread option offense and a 3-3-5 defense, and I'm convinced that this is going to happen this year. Nebraska is back. I'm calling it now. So, with that, on the offensive side of the ball, just go piece by piece here. O-line will be solid. I think there's a lot of talent there. You got Ben Scott coming back, Turner Corcoran coming back. Bryce Benhart is coming back. So 1, 2, 3 center to right tackle, all returning starters. And then you have, the left tackle and the left guard are rotational players who have started in the past. So there's a lot of protection available. There's a lot of experience available. And it's going to go a long way with helping Nebraska establish himself in this new look Big Ten. At the receiver position, definitely got your top tier players in a sense. You bring in Isaiah Nayor from Texas. You bring in Jamal Banks from Wake Forest. But outside of that, I have some concerns. Not a ton of experience. You can make an argument for Thomas Fidon in his own right. He's a red zone threat, but really it's a 1-2 punch who have both transferred in. The rest are a little bit behind the 8 ball and looking to establish that experience. At the QB room, you have Dylan Raiola, true freshman starter, number 1 QB in the class, from what I recall, depending on the service you look at. Former number 1 recruit. I know it didn't end that way with some of the shakeups, but potentially the next great Nebraska quarterback, and someone who's going to immediately make an impact for Nebraska and showcase what he's willing to accomplish early and often. There's going to be some growing pains. There's going to be some bumps, but Dylan Raiola is the guy for Nebraska moving forward. And then the running game, just not a ton of experience back there with Gabe Irvin, as well as their fullback Barrett Liebentritt. So not a lot of experience there, not a lot of opportunities on that front, but definitely will get some chances as well this year. Defensively, I think Nebraska takes a pretty big step forward this year. Nash Hutmacher on the D line is a high-level impact player, combined with Jamari Butler on the right defensive end. Solid 1-2 punch that will put them above average on that D line over the course of this season for the Big Ten. Nebraska's linebacker room, I got a little bit of questions there. You do have, I'm going to say it's Yavin Wright is going to be my guess, combined with John Bullock. So those two are, strong at the Mike and the Will linebacker spots. They've made their impact. They've made their presence felt. And then at the DB room, this is going to be another above average room for Nebraska. You bring in a transfer. You bring in Bly Hill, who comes in from St. Francis, but everyone around him, Isaac Gifford is a great safety, combined with Marcus Buford and Malcolm Hartzog. I think there's options back there, and I think there's some pretty elite players that can live up to their potential this year. And definitely interesting to see what opposing teams are going to do to try to beat Nebraska through the air when it should be one of their strong points. So, with that in mind, let's go with our offensive breakout player. We're going to go with Dylan Raiola. The future of Nebraska is now. Again, 5-star recruit in last year's class, someone who's ready to step up and make an immediate impact and an immediate difference. I'm sure there's going to be growing pains. I'm sure there's going to be throws that he wishes he could have back. We're going to learn about decision making, everything along those lines. But he's highly sought after, highly talented, great arm, great ball vision from what I've seen in high school clips. And you're ready to be that day one starter at Nebraska and bring them back to the relevancy that they've been waiting for so long. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I will go back to that linebacker room for MJ Sherman, who's in that jack spot in a 3-3-5. If we look at his numbers from last year, had a 3-tackle performance against Illinois and then a sack against Northern Illinois. So, from there, got on the stat sheet, played where he had to play, everything along those lines. Was more rotational last year, but is ready to make a big step when it comes to his permanent playing time moving forward. So really looking forward to seeing what MJ Sherman does this year, especially knowing that he is a senior. He doesn't have a lot of time left and wants to make an impact for this Nebraska team as they're on the way up. Now, as we head into team number 6, it's going to be a squad that, I think has always hovered around that like average to above average, time. And now this is the top third of the conference we're heading into right now. And, there's a name that I haven't said yet. And you're probably thinking to yourself, when are we calling them? When is it time for them? They should have gone 2-3 teams ago. Well, I think they're going right now, and that'll be Maryland. So this is kind of my upset, my shocker pick, so to speak, in the conference. Like when you think of a pure talent perspective, generally, you'd probably put Maryland somewhere in the middle. I think Maryland's schedule was very favorable this year. I think there's a lot of talent on the squad that's under research potentially. He brought a lot of good transfers, and I think there's a great coach in Mike Locksley who's continuously overperformed at a Maryland squad or a Maryland team it's hard to win there. Let's call it what it is. This is not Ohio State. This is not Michigan. This is not Penn State. And you've had to play all 3 of those teams year after year after year since joining the Big Ten. You don't have them on the schedule anymore. You might have 1 or 2 of them. I don't have the schedule in front of me offhand, but I think Maryland takes a big step this year. Same with Rutgers. Same with some of those teams that got buried between the big 3 to 4 argument. Indiana still, they're still figuring their stuff out. But Maryland, I think, is ready to take that next step. Locksley is in year 6, running a pro-style offense and a 4-3 defense. So let's take a look at what they've got for their roster. So a couple of changes up on all sides, or both sides of the ball, but predominantly on the offense. So starting with the O-line, you bring in quite a few new faces. You bring in Alan Herron, who comes from Division II Shorter, and apparently is going to be their starter at the left tackle. You bring in Josh Kaltenberger, who comes in from Purdue, and then you bring in, I'm going to say Aluo Ba, who comes in from Georgia. So no real returning starters. So this is a potential problem for Maryland. They will cross that bridge as they get there. It's a lot of rotational guys that have never had their full-on chance. and are going to get their full chance this year. So that's the way I look at this team. That's the way I look at what's in front of them. It's a lot of guys who are looking to make a name for themselves, and now so they have the opportunity to do so. Receiver room will be all right. You have Ty Felton and you have Caden Prather. So those two combined for a pretty strong 1-2 punch for Maryland this upcoming year. You'd love to see more experience across the board. You'd love to see more opportunities across the board, but having those first two guys locked down goes a very, very long way. At QB, you are replacing Talia Tagovailoa. You replace him with Billy Edwards, who's been riding the bench the last few years and is ready to be that starter for Maryland. Not a ton of experience so far, but is willing and ready to step up and deliver for Maryland this year. And part of how that's going to happen is because they have a great running back in Roman Hemby. So it takes a little bit of pressure off the receivers, takes a little bit of pressure off the quarterback if you know the run is something that needs to be respected. And at Maryland, it definitely does. It's a pro-style offense, which does often require a top-level running back. And I think Hemby is a top 5 running back in the Big Ten this year. So interesting to see how that's going to go. Looking to see if he can cross the 1,000-yard threshold for Maryland this year. I think if he gets enough carries, I think if he's at the 200 carry mark, he's going to hit it no problem. On the defensive side of the ball, I think it's pretty mirror image for Maryland. The D-line is going to be average. It's a, Donnell Brown at the jack is someone to watch in a good way. He's had his moments. He's your leader up front. Outside of that, you have a couple of development pieces, so to speak. Jordan Phillips, Quayshawn Fuller, guys like that that haven't had a ton of full-time experience, who have been predominantly rotational pieces. Linebacker room is a little bit of a step down, a little bit below average. You do have Ruben Hippolyte, who's kind of your main guy in the middle there. Fanaji Gote and then Kellen Wyatt are solid support pieces to that for that linebacker room. And as a result, though, it's just a little bit of a decrease compared to not just the D-line, but compared to the rest of the conference as a whole. Same thing with the DB room. You bring in Jalen Husky from Bowling Green, and then outside of that, you got Dante Trader, Glendon Miller, and that's kind of it from an experience perspective and from a consistency perspective. So very interesting to see what that DB room does, because it's one of the bigger question marks on a Maryland team that I think should be pretty good. So with that, on offense, I will take Alan Herron, the transfer from Shorter. Anyone who goes from Division II to a Power 4 and is ready to start immediately clearly has a nice big vote of confidence from the coaching staff. From what I saw in the player profile, he wasn't, I think he was a 3-star, so I didn't throw that in there. But from what I saw, he had offers from quite a few Power 4 schools. And, maybe he's a little bit underrated. Maybe he's a little bit, undervalued, and is ready to make a name for himself at Maryland this year. I think he has the tools to do it, to protect the blind side, lock it down, and allow Billy Edwards to create those plays that are going to keep Maryland in games long term. And then on the defensive side of the ball, hold on. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back a few slides. Yeah, I use Google Slides. It's all right. We'll go with Kevis Thompson from from that DB room. Sophomore, hasn't had a ton of playing time or a ton of experience yet. Really only had a one tackle performance against Auburn. Played predominantly as a true freshman in rotation, predominantly on special teams, but looking to make a name as a pretty lockdown corner for Maryland this year as they try to increase the efficiency of their DB room. So really looking forward to seeing what Maryland does, or what Kevis Thomas does for Maryland this year at that corner spot. And since you already know who I picked in 5th place, mistakes happen. It's all good. Gonna go with Ohio State. I know probably a little bit lower than what a lot of people have on their predictions this year. I think a lot of people are predicting Ohio State to win the Big Ten, win the national championship, everything like that. I think the Big Ten is very, very competitive this year. Ohio State is a gauntlet of a schedule, and I think fifth place is an appropriate place for them at this current time, especially when you look at the overall standings of the Big Ten. So Ryan Day, I think his seat gets even hotter, which to me is kind of silly because he's lost, I think, 6 or 7 games in 5 years. Maybe it's more. It might be 8. I don't have his overall record, but I mean, only lost what? Only Michigan and lost their bowl game last year. I don't remember who it was, to Mizzou, I believe. So generally speaking, a 1 to 2 loss season every single time he's been at Ohio State so far. So if Ohio State wants to pull the trigger and get rid of the guy, good luck to whoever is next. Ryan Day will land on his feet somewhere. I know a fifth place performance from Ohio State this year with everything they brought in probably gets him canned. I'm not rooting for it. I think he's a great coach. I just think the impatience of the fan base is a little bit unrealistic, especially when you see Michigan just win a national championship. So they're running a spread option offense combined with the 2-4-5 defense. And we'll take a look at their depth chart real quick. So we look at what they've got there. I'll start from the bottom up. Best running back room in the maybe the country, but definitely in the conference, with Travion Henderson leading the way as the number 1 guy. And you bring in, I know he's listed as the number 2 there, but Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss. Just a beast in his own right as well. Very interested to see, how that works out for Ohio State this year. But I think they're going to have no problem running the ball. From a QB perspective, you bring in Will Howard from Kansas State. I think he's kind of good enough. Interestingly enough, very similar to Kyle McCord. I think maybe a step up, but I'm just really curious to see. I don't think you drop Kyle McCord for Will Howard. I don't think the difference is all that great, but Ohio State sees it differently. That's why they get paid the big bucks, and very interesting to see what Will Howard is able to accomplish at Ohio State this year. Receiver room, you keep Emeka Egbuka. A lot of guys gone off to the draft. You bring in Jeremiah Smith, who's the number 1 recruit in the class of 2024. You got Carnell Tate waiting in the wings, and really that's it. I think the receiver room from a production standpoint has some question marks, because outside of Egbuka, not a lot of real game experience and a lot of real game production. And you had Marvin Harrison Jr. out there last year. He's gone. Stuff like that goes a long way in replacing it. And those Harrison was not a dime a dozen type of receiver. So can one of these guys step up and take the reins? Potentially, but we haven't seen it yet. So that being said, the O-line is stacked. You got 3 returning starters, and you bring in Seth McLaughlin from Alabama, but you combine him with Josh Simmons, Donovan Jackson, and Josh Fryer. So 4 out of 5, full-time starters at a Power 5 program and a top 5 Power 4 program. Ohio State's going to be okay on the line. It's one of the better lines in the conference as far as I'm concerned. If you look at the defense, D-line is stacked. Top 5 in the conference. No scrubs as far as we're concerned. Jack Sawyer is back. Ty Hamilton's back. Tyleik Williams is back. JT Tumaloa is back. To the point about Ryan Day earlier, he really did convince all these guys, let's run it back and win. And I got to respect it, because a lot of these guys could have gone off to the NFL, and they turned it on for their team. And very interested to see how they come together for one more year for their school. But the D-line is going to be fantastic. Linebacker room, I have questions. You have Cody Simon back there as a grad student. but he's one of two, and we don't know a lot about CJ Hicks from a performance standpoint. So interesting to see how that plays out. But you have the best DB room in the conference with Caleb Downs coming in from Alabama. He's electric. One of the last great recruits that Saban picked up and used pretty frequently at Alabama. You combine that with Lathan Ransom. You combine that with Davison Igbunasun. You combine that with Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock. It is a lockdown group of guys back there for Ohio State. So it's the best DB room in the conference, could be the best DB room in the country when it's all said and done. So on offense, you got to replace Maserati Marv. Might as well go with the number one recruit in the class of 2024, Jeremiah Smith. Heard nothing but good things coming out of high school. Trying to get Florida to flip, it wasn't happening. Didn't believe it was ever going to happen. You got all these spring reports telling us that he's one of the best receivers early on that Ohio State has ever seen. So if that praise is warranted from the jump, he could be your immediate impact player for Ohio State in a way that they haven't had at this level in quite some time. Ohio State's known for build up internally, let the older guys kind of play, let the skill rise to the top. If Jeremiah Smith is ready to play as a true freshman as a receiver of Ohio State, that's gigantic. And it means that it's just another weapon for Ohio State to utilize on their quest for a national championship. On the defensive side of the ball, it's going to be CJ Hicks. Had a 2-tackle performance against Minnesota and Michigan State last year. 5-star recruit coming out of 2022, just hasn't lived up to it yet. I think this is the year he lives up to it. I think this is the year he breaks out. Him and Cody Simon being that 1-2 punch for Ohio State in the linebacker room is going to be huge. And, I think you put it all together for an Ohio State team that is going to sink below the expectations of their team, but is still going to have a very solid, respectable season, even if it is a disappointment for their fan bases. So with that, we enter the top 4. And with that, I'm going to go with a team that's always going to be in the thick of it, always going to be in the mix, and a team that's always going to, surprise some folks, just given the consistency that they play with year after year. And you ask yourself, how are they in the thick of it? They just find a way. Going with Iowa. So that leaves kind of our big 3-ish towards the end. But yeah, Iowa, I'll take in 4th place. Kirk Ferentz, been there forever. Brian Ferentz is out at offensive coordinator. Very curious to see how they do offensively this year, considering how stagnant they were in the past. When you have the best scoring defense and the worst scoring offense and you still manage to win 10 games, it's pretty remarkable. But if they had even just a mediocre offense last year, if they just an average offense last year, they might have been a playoff team. They might have gone undefeated. They were that close. So really interested to see how that comes together, with their multiple style offense and a 4-3 defense, what that looks like for Iowa this year. So with that, we'll take a look at their depth chart, all in-house guys for the most part. We're going to start on the offensive line. Iowa and offensive line go together like Wisconsin and offensive line. This will be one of the best ones in the conference, if not the country. You got 4 returning starters with Mason Rickman, Logan Jones, Connor Colby, and Jennings Dunker, with Tyler Ellsbury being the only non-starter, but someone who's played pretty frequently in the rotation over the last couple of years. So no problem with the O-line. No issues there. And, that shouldn't be a shock to anyone. Receiver room, naturally, I think is going to be a little bit average, a little bit pedestrian, so to speak. You do have Seth Anderson, who's been your number 1 guy there. You got Luke Lachey at tight end. Obviously, tight end threats at Iowa are like peanut butter and jelly, like it's just an all-American classic. Luke Lachey will likely be that guy again for Iowa this year, even though they're predominantly a run-heavy offense. You got Cade McNamara back at quarterback. That good enough QB play goes a very long way, and that's kind of what Cade McNamara's MO is for Iowa. It's been that way since he was at Michigan, but just average QB play I don't expect him breaking any school records. Just combined with the way that Iowa runs their offense, combined with McNamara's skill set, and then the running room is uh, not known for its scoring. You do have LaShawn Williams back there, who is a yard getter, but not a touchdown getter. That would be nice to see. I think that's more so due to the Bryant Ferentz offense. But you combine that, you're running a fullback back there, a traditional Big Ten West 1970s looking offense. And I think as a result of that, the running back room is not the most experience that we've seen. It may not be the best that we've seen so far coming out of Iowa. On the defensive side of the ball, this is where Iowa is going to win all their games. Best D-line in the conference, best linebacker room in the conference, and a well above average DB room. So if we look at the D-line real quick, all four are dynamic. Deontay Craig, Aaron Graves, Yaya Black, and Ethan Herkett. I mean, pick one. O-linemen everywhere, be on the lookout. This is a tough day in Kinnick if you're a road team. They are going to make you work. They are going to go for your knees. They're going to do everything they can to get that pressure, and they're really good at it. Same with that linebacker room. It's multiple, right? But it's a 4-3, excuse me. And they come prepared. You have Nick Jackson, who's one of the best in the country or the conference. You have Jay Higgins, who's again, one of the best in the conference, if not the country, for a linebacker. You have Sebastian Castro, who's one of the best in the conference as well. You have just elite linebacker play, piece by piece by piece by piece. And then the DB room is nothing to nothing to laugh at. You have Deshaun Lee, Xavier Nwankpa, Quinn Schultz, and then Jermari Harris. Let's go with that one more time. Jermari Harris. And, again, there's a lot of lockdown corners back there. There's a lot of hard-hitting safeties back there. There's a lot of guys that are instant playmakers for this Iowa defense. That's kind of the expectation if you are Iowa. And I'm waiting for the emergence of one, if not all of them, to continue to secure Iowa as the best scoring defense in the country. So on offense, our breakout player will be Rusty Van Wetzinga, their fullback back there. I don't know how they really use him, if he's more of a blocker back. Hasn't recorded anything on the stat sheet, but he's a young kid. I'm sure his opportunity will come to catch some passes. Maybe a first and one from the goal, and he punches it through. His opportunities will come. They just haven't happened yet. He redshirted last year, hasn't had a chance to make that impact, but it will happen this year. Promise you that much. When I think of Iowa's offense, I do think of short passes and run first. And, a fullback in that type of environment traditionally thrives alongside of a tight end. So since Iowa is basically tight end U at this point, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Van Wetzinga contributes to that, run and or pass attack over the course of this season. Then on the defensive side of the ball, we'll go with Deshaun Lee at corner. Definitely showing up on the stat sheet so far. 2 passes defended against Iowa State. That's your rivalry game. That's your early big game from out of conference. And then an 8-tackle performance against Michigan. That was the conference championship game. So definitely getting the right type of exposure that you need for a younger guy on this defense, and someone who could potentially emerge as your leader in the DB room for the future. Youngest guy out there at any position group, ready to make a name for himself, hungry to step up, and really interested to see how Deshaun Lee does that this year for a hardcore Iowa defense that is ready to beat teams any way they can. So now we go to our top 3. We have 2 of our Big Ten East, 4 teams from that side of the country. And then we got our last one from the Pac-12 newbies. So where do we go from there? One's got to be left out of the championship game. The other 2 are going to head out. So with that third place team for me is going to be Oregon. So that means we have a conference championship matchup of Michigan versus Penn State. So no use in hiding it, right? You can put two and two together when you're reading the timestamps. So Oregon, I think, is going to be just one step short of a conference championship game. Don't get me wrong, super talented squad, playoff contender for sure. So Dan Lanning in year two, new conference, ready to, take Oregon to that next step as a program. And with the playoff expanding from 4 to 12, or Oregon will be in the thick of it for quite some time. So if we look at the options there. You have a spread option offense. You look at a 4-2-5, 4-3 defense for Oregon, and ready to take on their new conference and all their new foes with a top to bottom new looking team anywhere you see it. So, a couple of changes there on offense as well as defense. So when we look at some of these guys across the board, we on the offensive side of the ball, I don't have a single group that I think is going to be anything less than average. I'll start with the O-line because I think it's the most pedestrian. You bring in Matthew Bedford from Indiana, but the rest you return three starters with Josh Cornerly, Marcus Harper, and Johnny Cornelius. And then you have a rotational player with Iapani Lalulu. Going to assume that was right. So a lot of experience there, a lot of returning production, and great opportunity for everyone involved to make a name for themselves. If we go to the receiver room, I think it's the best one in the Big Ten. You bring in Evan Stewart from Texas A&M. You combine that with Tez Johnson, who's been dynamic for Oregon. You bring in you return Trayshawn Holden, who's had his fair share of production. Terrence Ferguson at tight end is a huge red zone threat. Oregon's going to be airing it out. Make no mistake about it. Oregon is going to crush some secondaries this year. It's going to be a long day for those DBs, for those safeties, and for those linebackers who play back in coverage. You bring in at quarterback, you bring in Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the conference, if not the country. It's going to be a huge year for Dylan Gabriel, the same way that it's been huge for Bo Nix. Dylan Gabriel is going to follow in those footsteps. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this kid play for Oregon this year. And then you got Jordan James at running back, who I think is a top 5 running back in the conference this year. A high-powered scorer, guy who can get you, anything you need, in rushing, receiving, whatever it might be. But this offense is going to, as far as I'm concerned, annihilate everyone ahead of them. Same with the defense, though. Don't get me wrong. You bring in Derek Harmon from, where's he from? Michigan State. You bring in Jamari Caldwell. This will be from Houston. Those are two big names to look out for. And then you return Jordan Birch. You return Mateo Uiagalelei, who are strong enough in their own rights, right? So I think that's a D line that's top 5 in the conference. Linebacker room will be somewhere in the middle. Knowing that it's a 4-2-5, you have the 1-2 punch of Justin Jacobs and Jeffrey Bassa. I think there's a lot of opportunity for both of them, especially right in the middle. They're returning. There's a lot of strong power there. There's a lot of chemistry there, and I'm really interested to see how that comes together for Oregon. And then at the DB room, you have a lot of transfers coming in. You bring in Cam Alexander from UTSA. You bring in Kobe Savage from Kansas State. You bring in Jabbar Muhammad, who comes in from Washington. And then you bring in Brandon Johnson, who comes in from Duke. So quite a few options across the board there. And then your only returning player back there is going to be Tysheem Johnson. So from there, it's going to be up to everyone to kind of make the most of that situation. I think it's another top 5 DB room in the conference. Oregon's going to win a lot of their games. They won a lot of their games last year. They're expected to win a lot of their games this year. They're expected to compete for the national championship, and they have the roster to do it. They have the coaching to do it, and it's a matter of just putting it all together. So on the offensive side of the ball, I'm going to go with our transfer from Indiana. I'll go with Matthew Bedford at that right guard spot. Only one I couldn't find a ton of information about. If I could see a little bit more of that returning production, which I couldn't based on what I was viewing around around my sources. But Matthew Bedford is that guy who's ready to make a move. He is that guy who's ready to step up. He's ready to be a full-time O lineman for Oregon and for this team, but just doesn't have the experience from what I've seen compared to the people around him. And it's already a quality offensive line as is. So definitely looking to see what he can do for this Oregon offensive line and how he can make the most of his experience. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I will go with Justin Jacobs. So just looking at some of the stuff he's done in the past, he picked up a sack against Washington State, pass defended against Cal. So conference games, games that matter, games that have an impact. And he's been there through thick and thin. This is his last year. He's out of there after this year, and ready to make an impact on their final title push and bring home the national championship for the first time in Ducks history. So I think Justin Jacobs is going to play a big role in that journey if that were to happen. And if that's the case, it's going to rely on his shoulders just as much as it's going to rely on the other 10 guys out there around him. So that does take us to our top two teams. I will start with Penn State first. It's not any. I mean, like I do have it in terms of order per se of who I think is going to finish second versus first in the conference. But that being said, it's your conference championship game is really the only thing that matters at this point. So I do think Penn State will be in the Big Ten championship game. They will be facing off against Michigan, who we'll talk about in a little bit. James Franklin will get back to the mountaintop, so to speak, for Penn State. I know there's a lot of rumbling about him. Oh, he can't win the big game. He can't beat the teams he needs to beat. I think the schedule is a lot more favorable this year than it's been in the past. And, you don't have the hill of Michigan and Ohio State. You get one of the two. It's Ohio State this year. Combined with everyone else they got, combined the fact that they got a lot of those tough games at home, I think Penn State is, destined for a big year from my end. So they're going to be running a spread offense. They're going to be running a 4-2 defense. So let's see what that depth chart looks like. So on the offensive side of the ball, O-line, I've got some questions. You return Sal Wormley, and then you got a lot of rotation guys. You bring in Nolan Rucci from Wisconsin, and then the rest are guys who have been around the program, but they just haven't had a lot of playing time. That's good. That's the only thing I think could hold this offense back. I think Penn State offensively is going to be a lot better than they are defensively. I think the pieces are there for Penn State to succeed when they have the ball in their hands versus when the defense is out there, just because the defense lost a lot of pieces over the course of this past year. But the O-line, I've got some questions about. I do think it's going to be one of the bottom ones in the conference from a pure experience standpoint. Then we look at the receiver room. It's going to be upper half. You bring in Julian Fleming from Ohio State. I think that's a great pickup for Franklin and the team. You got Tyler Warren at tight end, great red zone threat, dynamic playmaker. So a good 1-2 punch that puts them in the top half of the conference. Drew Aller, I think, is a top 5 QB in the Big Ten. And, I know there's some controversy around him. I know, there's some desire to think that he's not the guy for Penn State. Give him some time. He was a first-year starter as a sophomore last year. There's going to be some bumps and bruises along the way. I think he's going to make some big strides this year and establish himself as the guy for Penn State for this year and potentially beyond. And then you got Nick Singleton at running back, who's obviously one of the best 5 in the conference. No issues with Penn State being able to run the ball down anyone's throat. So if the line can get fixed and the line can get established, Penn State offense is going to be off the charts. It's going to be one of the better ones in the conference for sure. The defense is where I have some concerns, just purely on the fact that there's so many younger, inexperienced players out there. If you look at the D line outside of Abdul Carter, who's your guy? Is it Dennis Sutton or Sutton? Is it Devon Ellis? I don't know. I see a lot of players that haven't had a ton of experience and haven't got a ton of pressure up front. Same with the linebacker room. I think the linebacker room and the DB rooms are a little bit of a step behind. If you look at the linebacker room outside of Kobe King, who's your guy back there? Is it Dominic DeLuca? Is it Tony Rojas? I don't know. I see that one guy in Kobe King that I know I can rely on, and I need the others to step up. If I look at the DB room, you bring in AJ Harris from Georgia, but hasn't had a ton of playing time down there. You have Kevin Winston at the strong safety. You have Jalen Reed at the nickelback. But who else? Like, I really want to see, these other players kind of come into their own this year. A lot of them are underclassmen or juniors, and I want to see them make the most of this experience and this opportunity. We just haven't seen it yet, so it's very hard for me to evaluate them. So looking at offense for our breakout player, we'll go to the O-line. Noah Rucci coming in from Wisconsin. 5-star recruit in the class of 2021. Just hasn't lived up to that 5-star potential. But as far as I'm concerned, if you could do it in high school, you can do it in college. Maybe that change of pace just goes a very, very long way. And he comes in and is the next great Penn State O-lineman. I'm looking forward to seeing him play. Looking forward to seeing, how he develops as a junior. Knowing that he can potentially comes back, after a good year and continue to develop himself. But I think he's going to be the guy that protects Drew Aller and helps set the tone on offense, and especially on that offensive line, which is a little bit younger. So with that on defense, we'll go with Tony Rojas. That linebacker room that I'm not too sure on. Did have a pretty big game against Maryland, a forced fumble recovered, and an interception against Maryland. That that's the type of game you want to see week in and week out. It's a lot easier said than done. But as far as we're concerned, we've seen those glimpses of what he can do. We've seen a 5-tackle performance in the bowl game against Ole Miss. So we've seen what happens when he's put into the spotlight, that he does show up, that he does deliver. And he was doing that as a true freshman. Now as a sophomore, now that he's able to come to his own, he could be the next big Penn State linebacker for the future. So I got Rojas on defense, Rucci on offense for a Penn State team that is ready to take that next step and make it to their conference championship game. So next up, we got Michigan. You can't bet against the champ until they lose. That's where I'm at with this. I know, head coach is gone. You got Sharon Moore in, knows the program very, very well. Harbaugh did a great job, overcoming the obstacles and winning it all. Sharon Moore was there right in the thick of it as the offensive coordinator. Had to coach the last few games when Harbaugh was suspended. Beat Ohio State. That's a big pull. That's a big piece of the resume there to keep him on as your full-time head coach. And coming off a national championship season, I know Michigan is rebuilding in a sense, but there's no reason they can't be back at the mountaintop sooner rather than later. So it's a spread option offense with a multiple 4-2-5 defense. Let's take a look at the depth chart. So predominantly same roster. I know there was a little bit of transfer out and people coming in and out due to the coaching change, the draft, and everything like that. But let's take a look at this team. And again, just due to the experience or lack thereof in certain positions, I do have some question marks. O-line, a little bit below average from where we're at right now. They do bring in Josh Prieb from Northwestern. He was one of their starters in the past. They got Miles Hinton, who's a rotational player starter in the past. They retain Giovanni El Hadi. So they've had some pieces that work. And getting the O-line secure is step number one. That goes a very, very, very long way. Same with the quarterback role. We don't at this point we don't really know who it is going to be. That's the fun part about all of this. I think it's going to be Alex Orji, who has not established himself as a passer. He's a pretty good runner from what we've seen, but I think it's it's time for Alex Orji to step up and be that full-time quarterback for Michigan this year, but not enough information to see, to determine how he will be in that role. Is he going to be one of the better ones? I think he could be a Jalen Milroe-esque quarterback, which is more run first, pass second, but time will tell how that works out. The receiver room is pretty depleted. You have Colston Loveland at tight end. That's a big, big piece of their offense. You combine that with Samaj Morgan, and that's really it from a returning production standpoint. Really curious to see how these younger guys step up for Michigan and make an impact for their new QB. Running back room got no problems. Donovan Edwards is obviously one of the better backs in the conference. I think it's a generally overall average room, but I think with Donovan Edwards leading the way, he'll eclipse that 1,000-yard mark. He came 9 yards short last year or the year before, one of the two, and he's ready to take on full-time responsibility now that Blake Corum is out of the equation. But defensively, D-line is solid. Middle of the pack. You got Josiah Stewart out there. Well, he's more of a linebacker, but he kind of plays up every once in a while. Combine that with Mason Graham in the middle. I think it's a good-looking offensive or defensive line. Not going to have too many problems up there. Linebacker room again. I think average as well. You bring in Sean Barham from Maryland. That's a big addition to a room that needed some help. Combine that with Ernest Hausman and Derek Moore, and you have a pretty dynamic set back there that'll be average from a production standpoint. And then the DB room is where I've got my questions, because outside of Makari Page, I do have production questions about the rest of this DB room. I really want to see how they come together. I want to see how they make these moves. Will Johnson has shown flashes of what needs to be done, but as far as I can tell for the rest, there's still some questions to be answered. I think they will be answered this fall, but for right now, I can't pinpoint certain people and say that's it. That's the move. So on our offense, our breakout player is going to be Marlon Klein, one of those tight ends that they use. Hasn't really seen a lot of the field yet. Played more so predominantly as a blocker and on special teams. But I think as the pass game opens up for Michigan this year, Klein will play a hand, in opening up the field. Whether it is as a blocker or as a pass-catching receiver, time will tell. But I think Marlon Klein is ready to take the next step as a redshirt sophomore and establish himself on this offense over the course of the year. And then on defense, we'll go with Jaden McBurrows. So your nickelback there did have an interception against Michigan State. That is a rivalry game. That's a tough one as always. Regardless of what happened to Michigan State last year, it's always a game that has intensity and focus. And Jaden McBurrows was one of the pieces of that intensity and that focus. So, when that's all said and done, I do expect more from him as a full-time starter at nickelback instead of a rotational piece. And I think he's going to be one of the pieces that is, a little bit underdeveloped right now, but rises to the occasion, locks down things for the DBs, and puts Michigan back in their conference championship game. So just to recap our final standings heading into the Big Ten championship, and I will tier some of these schools off just for reference. It's Purdue and Minnesota. I think that's a tier. So Purdue is in 18th, Minnesota is in 17th. Indiana is in 16th, UCLA is in 15th. I think that's a tier. We have Wisconsin in 14th, Michigan State in 13th. I think that is a tier as well. I think that's like the just outside of bowl eligibility tier. Now we got Illinois is at 12th. I think kind of they're in their own space, as is Northwestern as at 11th. I don't feel comfortable putting them together or with anyone else. This next tier, I think, is the solidly average, with Rutgers in 10th, USC in 9th, and Washington in 8th. From there, we go to the teams that I think are just on the outside looking in, and that's Nebraska 7th, Maryland 6th, Iowa and Ohio State in 4th. From there, it's that almost elite squads, which would be Iowa in 4th, Oregon 3rd, and then our final two teams of Penn State in 2nd, Michigan State in 1st. So we got our matchup. We're going down to Indiana. It is Michigan, Penn State. Winner takes all. Winner gets that first round bye. Who's it going to be? Is it going to be Michigan back to the mountaintop, defending their crown? Is it going to be Penn State kind of shocking the world a little bit, going for their spot, going for their first round bye, and capitalizing on a pretty big season overall? So with that in mind, my 2024 Big Ten Conference champion pick is, Michigan's going back. They'll be a top 4 seed. I think they got it. I think they're going to run. It's not going to be with Harbaugh. He's gone, but I expect Michigan to finish the job. I expect them to overcome the odds, have another great year, and be the front runner and leader for the Big Ten, regardless of the rebuild that is happening around them. So those are my thoughts. What are you thinking about the Big Ten as a whole? Where am I right? Where am I wrong? Leave it in the comments below. But thanks for tuning in. Next time we'll be talking about the Big 12, another conference with quite a few new teams, new faces, new changes, so on and so forth. Who's going to be the top of that conference? Who's going to be the bottom feeder? Who's going to be in the middle? Everything along those lines and more on the New Year 6 podcast. So thanks for tuning in. Stay cool out there, and I'll catch you on the next one.